We're recording a podcast in the woods.
Yeah.
This is really appropriate because this is part 2 of a conversation with you, and like so much of my vision of what you experienced was you being in a place you talked about being like naked in the woods.
Oh yeah, that was so cool.
And being outside, you know, is like you feel more alive in some ways. And so for me, being out here with you, and we've walked this path quite a few times, you know, it feels appropriate. So here we are. We're
Here
doing
we
this
are.
thing.
I'm excited.
Yeah. All right. You probably don't remember where we left off, but I do. We left off talking about a little bit about our experience of leaving what we grew up to know as the truth. And you ended with the BT word for truth, which is, do you remember what was the word?
The BT word for truth is basé.
That's what you said.
Yeah.
That's how we ended the last conversation. And I wanted to talk a little bit about the way we grew up perceiving that word, like what that meant for us as you growing up Seventh-day Adventist and me growing up evangelical, Pentecostal, all that sort of stuff. Truth was a word we probably would have said very often. But our relationship to truth now is quite different. I imagine for you, I know it's different. For me, it's different. What does that word bring about for you now?
Yeah, so you know, being in Gabon particularly, like a part of the tradition of Witi, or the art of knowing, the study of life itself, right, is this it's like constantly assessing this thing called truth. And a question gets asked to you, like, you know, what is truth? What is it? You know, and, you know, people have all these different answers. And the simple answer, it's like the simplest answer, and it like makes so much sense to me for the Bwiti tradition, and what I actually like hold true is it is the assessment of what is reality, what is real. And so the way in which we understand what is real is through our senses.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And so, you know, any scientist, any person will tell you that you process things through your senses.
Yeah.
And so for us, it's not enough for us just to rely on one.
Yeah.
We have to be able to assess it through at least 3. Right. And so, you know, we believe that we have 6 senses, the 5 that most people will be able to say, you know, sight, hearing, you know, smell, taste, and touch, and then intuition. Right. And so in order for us to be able to assess whether or not something is true, we have to be able to test it through at least 3, the rule of 3.
Okay.
Right. Which I always found interesting because, you know, 2 to 3 witnesses in Christian scripture and Jewish scripture as well.
Yeah.
This idea of like you need to be able to test things in order to be able to assess whether or not something is true.
That's good. I was curious about that because in my mind, it's my perception of reality will vary greatly from your perception of reality compared to somebody else that's listening to this' perception of reality. And so the way that we can affirm something to be true is there a kind of, will all 3 of us agree on these 3 senses and what's happening? Is that, or is it more of an individualized sort of subjective truth that we're talking about?
Well, I mean, it's like most times when we don't agree on something, it's because somebody's lying about something. Somebody's not telling themselves the truth and saying the truth out loud.
Yeah.
Right. So people would say the perception is that there's no racism.
Yeah.
Yeah. You're just not lying. You're just lying to yourself.
Right.
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 And that if you actually tested it through your senses, you'd actually be able to see that it exists. Right. And so,
can I touch on that?
Please.
Your senses meaning beyond your own personal experience of the world. Of course, you can lie to yourself if you only stick to or deceive yourself more so if you only stick to your own perception of the world. But once you bump up against another person's perception of the world,
right,
that confirms the reality of racism or something like that.
Well, not just perception, experience,
right?
Right. Like if I could tell a story of somebody that like did something to me and they specifically did it because of the color of my skin.
Yes.
And they say they did it because of the color of my skin. I heard it. I saw it.
Right.
Right. But But then if a person is able to see those things, like you see it on television, you are experiencing what is happening around you.
Yeah.
You know, there's no question that it existed. The
Right.
question is whether or not it exists today.
Yeah. Right.
Right. And you can actually assess those through your senses.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that, yeah. No, I was going to say something else. I just can't remember.
Okay. No, that's helpful. And I think a conversation that I pay attention to is mostly for white folks who haven't experienced relationship or experienced a genuine telling of a experience that they trust is something that I'm noticing a lot more. Growing up white, where history is told from a very particular vantage point, and I learned essentially that racism died with the civil rights movement.
Yeah, right.
And so when I first started to meet black folks and be in relationship, I didn't believe their stories. And so there's this thing with truth and lies that is such a normal part of our lives, and those words get abused so frequently. And I think that the way that we grew up with those words was harmful to those words and to our perception of those things. And so when we come together and we've got our senses at work, not just our feelings,
right?
You know, not just our own perception of the world.
I actually want to speak to the feelings.
I want to hear what you have to say.
So that's, you just reminded me of what I wanted to say. Like the feelings piece, you know, and this is my assessment, but I actually think that it's in alignment with like Dwiti teaching, which is what has happened to many of us, especially in the West, is that instead of allowing our senses to give information to our brain, which is the way that we were created, we now allow our feelings to give information to our brain, and that's how we perceive the world.
Right.
But our feelings are not necessarily the most trustworthy,
right?
Because they are actually a mechanism to discharge the things that we're trying to process that are happening to us. So they're important, but they're not the best way to assess whether or not something is true.
Yeah, that's good.
They're the best way to discharge the distress that we feel when something is happening.
That's a really helpful designation.
Right.
As someone who's a deep feeler and who's spent a lot of their life trying to figure out what to do with those feelings, you know, it's important to be reminded that that's not reality always. It's something I'm experiencing. It's the discharge. Say that phrase one more time.
Yeah, it's like it is a tool or a mechanism to discharge some of the trauma or the things that are sitting inside my body that I need to release.
Yeah, that's good.
Right? As opposed to now I can use that as a mechanism to be able to say this is true.
Yeah.
That's why people are operating the way that they are.
Yeah.
It's like, in a lot of cases, is that we're operating from like, I feel angry about this particular thing. And so because I feel angry about it, anything that reminds me of that thing, I'm going to feel angry about.
Yes, right.
But one day a person walks up to you and reminds you of this thing, but they actually have an intention of doing something different. And you are assessing that the truth is that they're being malicious when they're doing the opposite thing.
Yeah.
This is so often how we start missing each other, right?
It's true. Because I mean, these are things that we call triggers, right?
Right.
Something's triggered in you. So it's your body doing what it's supposed to do.
Right.
It's like you're receiving a warning and you're like, I've seen this before. But that's not always the case. You haven't seen it all before.
Right.
And I find that interesting when I was listening back to our last conversation and you talked about going through initiation and how that's still your intention. But there was this like not readiness.
Yeah.
And you said in some ways you were still lying to yourself.
Yeah.
That you, like ways that you needed to work through. Have you given more thought to some of those things? What does the truth look like for you in this moment? For I mean, as much as you're willing to share.
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of things, you know, when I was growing up, like a part of what was really hard for me. So I grew up in a you know, African American home. That was like upper middle class. So most of the people, not everybody, but most of the people I was in relationship to were like upper middle class white people. Right. So I had some upper middle class African American families that were on my block that we spent time with. But where I went to school, who I spent energy like cultivating relationships with, all those particular things were predominantly white. And one of the things that I learned is that I wanted more relationship with African American folks and people coming from other like racial backgrounds,
Yeah.
particularly in ethnicity backgrounds.
Yeah.
What I found is that we all had these different expectations around how a black person was supposed to show up, an African American person was supposed to show up, and that I didn't actually fit that mold. And so people are like, well, you don't act black, you don't act like me, culturally we don't get along, we don't mesh well, things like that. Everybody had their own distresses, I had my distresses. It made it very difficult for me to fit in with groups.
Wow.
And so what I found very early on is that it was easier for me to become like a chameleon. It's easier for me to like figure out the rules of a particular group or a particular room. If I learned those rules, I could adapt and become what people wanted me to be.
Yeah.
That in and of itself was a denial of who I actually was.
Yes.
Therefore, I started to create this mindset that was like a complete lie. And so when I say I'm lying to myself, there are ways in which there are things that I would say were true about me that are not true about me, that I just do because I think that they're the right thing to do. An example was like yesterday, you know, I was talking to somebody, and, you know, I have a lot of like African like thinking, teaching, something like this. So this person made a set of assumptions about me around like, oh, do you know, do you do this or do you do that? And I was saying, no, I don't.
Yeah.
And they were like, well, you know, I'm confused because I thought that you were like really into African spirituality and things like that, right? And my reaction to that is what I want to go towards.
Yeah.
My reaction to that was, oh, I need to change what I'm doing.
Okay.
So that's the trap of the lie.
Yeah.
Is that now I need to adapt so that this person will think that I'm more worthy of them like following me or being in relationship to me.
Yes.
That's the lie.
Yes.
And so before that, I would have just changed.
Yeah.
Now I was like, F that. And it's not a reaction to them. They're just carrying out their own stuff, right?
Of course, yeah.
It was, I see what you're doing there. Not you, but I see what's happening.
Yeah.
Right? And now that I see what's happening, I'm going to choose something different. That's woods.This. And that's like, that. It's the most powerful gift that's ever been given to me by my ancestors.
I love it because
Yeah.
And it's easy to, well, the difficulty is identifying the true you in many ways beyond the chameleon part, beyond the cultural aspects where you say, like, you were brought up around a lot of upper middle class white folks, which means that in some ways you had adopted some cultural like values that aren't inherent to woods.This, aren't inherent to what your ancestral roots were. And so that soul thing that you're longing for is the truth of who you are. But being able to recognize in a moment where someone's like, well, I thought African spirituality was this, which is a wild thing because Africa's a continent. That'd be like saying I thought North American or South American spirituality was this. That's like a gigantic swath of people and different ideas. That you were able to notice, oh, I'm not actually going to shift because this person doesn't resonate with what I'm saying. It doesn't resonate with what their experience of what I'm talking about is. To be true to whatever path you're on, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense to me as what the truth is.
Yeah.
Okay, so when someone says to you, let's say, and I don't know if you've had this experience, but if someone,
probably.
You might have, yeah, you probably have.
Just play it.
If you've had this experience of someone saying like, well, now you're denying the truth that you were raised with.
Oh yeah.
What does that look like for you? Have you experienced that? Because if you haven't, you will. And I'm just curious what that.
I'm sure people listening to this podcast are like, "Oh my goodness, not you, no." Oh, what I'll say, yeah, right. My dad, man, I love my dad and my mom. So I told my parents that I'm not Christian anymore.
Wow.
You know? And my mom was like, on the phone, she's just like, okay. You know, I can hear in her voice. She's like trying to be supportive and accepting. And my dad calls me like the next day and is like, you know, you really upset your mother.
Oh man.
She's fine. They'll be fine.
Yeah. They will.
But he was just like, because for them, what I just said is I no longer want to spend eternity with you.
Woo.
You know what I'm saying? So like,
wild.
For them, it is, I've lost my son, and all the time that I'm gonna have with him is here.
Yeah.
That's the statement that I'm making to a Christian.
That's devastating, right?
So, it's a funeral.
Yes.
You know, it was a funeral for me.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, you and I talked about this. I can't remember if we talked about it on the podcast or we've had so many conversations, but it's like, I've been really mourning, like, Yeshua for me was not just a belief. He's my homie. He was like, actually, he was actually somebody that like got me through stuff.
Yeah. Right.
Like, he was somebody that I was like calling upon and like relating to when I was really scared.
Yes.
Or when I really needed something, when I really needed help.
Yeah.
It was like losing a friend, you know? And so, yeah, I still believe in a lot of the teachings as long as they're in alignment with like what's true. You know what I mean?
Right.
We talked about this.
Yeah.
Not all of it's in alignment.
Right.
Right. And so, you know, I haven't just thrown everything out, but I'm not interested in like relating to like taking on lies with truth.
Yeah.
Just for the sake of it.
That makes a lot of sense.
So like for me with them particularly, as like I started questioning, like, dang man, am I making the right decision? You know, my parents are really down and things like that. And then, you know, a week later, it was fine. Because like the people that really love me and the people that really want to be in relationship with me will always do that.
Yeah.
Right. And so it was like, it was hard for them. It's still hard for them. Some like, they don't know, can we pray? They ask sometimes. I'm like, yes, y'all continue to live your lives the way you want to live your lives. Yeah. And it's not like, you know, Sakura uses this language that really resonates with me around like, I'm still like culturally Christian in the sense that like, that doesn't go away. I grew up in a culture where like, when certain music comes on, I'm going to sing it.
Right.
And I'm going to close my eyes. I'm going to sing it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, we still pray.
Yeah.
Just in the Bwiti tradition, when we pray, we just say thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah. I think that's a major thing that has been difficult for a lot of families, for mine in particular, and I know for your parents, where it is, we're all sort of mourning something. Yeah. We're mourning the loss of something, either us or them. And my mother has communicated that it is the hardship of her life, the heartache of her life, that I have, you know, walked away. And they're constantly praying, you know, for our return in some way. That's agonizing. It's difficult to know. And at the same time, you know, I don't necessarily use the same language, but it resonates as the same thing. The truth within you is calling you to something else. Yeah. And you're not able to just be like, well, I'm going to do this to please someone else now, which is what we grew up doing, being compliant, doing the right thing. And in that way, thinking that we could earn our way into acceptance, whether it was God or people. Yeah. And to not do that anymore is a major shift and causes a lot of disruption. I mean, you're a disruptive person.
Yeah. Just, I live my life that way.
I wonder how that is going to look for you now, as someone who's no longer sort of, you're disruptive because you want to bring about justice. You want to live in justice. You want to live in freedom. And you also wrestled with this need to fit in and be a chameleon, and to not have that need for that need to fade away. Yeah. I wonder what that's going to look like for you.
Yeah, me too. I mean, it's like, you know, obviously it isn't completely gone because I still have tendencies to want to lean there.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, like the way, you know, Bwiti talks about this is like, you choose it. What's your choice? What's the choice you're going to make? You know, and so you see it coming up, choose something different.
Yeah.
And so it's like, that's, you know, part of the practice. Yeah. It's like, let me choose something different. Like, one of the major things for me is like, I've spent a lot of energy building things for other people. And, you know, one of the things that the medicine Iboga showed me was that I will build things for other people to my detriment. Yeah. Like, well, I say for other people, but it's like this idea of like, I choose to build a thing to the point where I no longer belong to the thing anymore. So it's like this self-fulfilling prophecy. And it's like, I'm not going to do that anymore.
No, that's a pattern that I know you've talked about a lot. You recognized when you were in it, doing it.
Yep.
How, you know, how is that going to show? You're now at this place in your life of a major transition. You're exiting a position you've been in for what, 5, 6 years?
5 years.
Yeah. 5 years. Yep, it's a big deal.
We've been friends that long, man.
We have. Look at us, veteran friends. And moving into some unknown territory. You're going back to Gabon in the new year. Does the word hope have like any resonance for you? Is that a word you still use? What does that word look like for you now compared to what it maybe used to look like?
Yeah, I think it resonates in the sense of I have hope for a better life for myself, a happy life.
Yeah.
Um, Christianity, man, and it's like all of the hard things about Christianity, I'll put it that way, are the constant chastisement of oneself and the lack of acceptance of who one is.
Yeah.
And always trying to become something that one is not.
Yes. Right.
Right. And so it's like you're never good enough. Like the premise of Christianity is you're never good enough, so you need somebody else that's good enough to save you.
Man, that's it. And then you internalize this. I was talking to my daughter about this the other day. And I love that she sort of recognizes this as a thing that could be harmful. That the highest value explicitly in Christianity is self removal. Yeah. It's laying yourself down for somebody else. And what I think that we're coming to is a prioritization of ourselves in a way that doesn't do harm to ourselves for someone else's gain. Like really in the end, that doesn't serve anybody.
Right.
Causes a lot of confusion. I think that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, like, so when you're talking about like hope for me, it's like it's not, it's like, I know, it's like knowing. It's like hope for me is like, I hope, I have hope in something that is possible.
Yes.
While it's like, actually now I know who I am.
Yeah.
And I know who I'm going to be.
Yeah.
Because I get to choose it.
Okay.
I'm choosing it for myself.
All right. So that's what I mean. Hope then takes on a very different shape. Because hope from our context was always someday everything's going to be okay.
Yeah. Nope.
Today, you're making a choice that this is what I want.
Exactly.
Oof. A fundamentally different way of approaching life. Yeah. I feel like hope is something that we're all longing for in some way. I notice when I share with people about my experience of getting out of evangelicalism, it feels like getting out of a cult. And so a lot of people are mourning, they feel lost, they feel lonely, depressed, anxious. And I've heard a lot of people say, I need some hope that it's going to be okay. I'm like, well, the fact that you're saying that is hope. You're saying, I want life. I want life. But we're so used to the conditioning of hope meant a particular thing. When you lose that, it's a gift, but it's also very uncomfortable because you no longer have a hope to live for all of eternity in a mansion.
Yep.
It's beautiful to think of hope this way, though, now on the other side of it. And it's, very interesting.
Yeah, I mean, Buiti teaches that life is our greatest gift. And so, and we didn't do anything for it. It was given to us, right? Yeah. And so our role is to take life and be happy, right? And so if you're doing something that isn't making you happy, stop. You know what I'm saying? Like, and you're laughing, and I don't want people to make it seem like I'm being sarcastic, because this was something that I when I'm saying it now is as if it's just comes to you.
No, I know.
But it's I'm agonizing. It's like horrible, and it's like, oh, I don't have to do this anymore. What do you mean?
It's one of those moments. You know me. I laugh a lot when something resonates as true.
Yeah,
it's almost like there it is. Yeah. Because it's just like it feels like so simple and so profound at the same time. Yeah. Those are the truest things. You even said that before. If it's almost like if it's not overcomplicated, it's true.
Yeah.
Now that can be taken and run with in some wrong ways, but it does feel like it resonates as true, and that's usually when I laugh.
Yeah.
Okay, one more word for you. One more.
Yeah.
Faith.
I mean, I use it because it's like it's also a part of I think American vernacular.
Yeah.
To use faith, so faith tradition, this and that. I mean,
You, for the record, have been the executive director of Brockton Interfaith
I know, right?
Community for 5 years, and you do interfaith community organizing.
Right.
That's the language around it.
Yeah.
I wonder, and we've talked about this word a lot over the years.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely resonates for me as something to help to describe different people's traditions of spiritual path, spiritual walk, right?
Yeah.
And or religion, right? Which I would say are different,
yes.
in some ways. So I think it helps to describe things, the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I don't know. I mean, one of the things I think that makes me so charismatic and inspirational to people is that I actually believe big and dream big.
Yeah.
And that like requires a level of this evidence of things hoped for. Now I got it wrong. I got it right the first time. Substance of things hoped for, evidence of things not seen. Right? It's like I'm hoping that something greater can happen.
Yeah.
But it hasn't happened yet.
Right.
And I'm trying to get people to believe in it enough so that it can manifest.
Yeah.
Right. And so if I'm able to do that, it manifests. And so there's like ways in which people have to believe in something they can't see yet.
Yeah.
In order to make those things happen. I think that's real. And not just think that. I know it's real because that's how I build.
Yeah.
I build based around something that I can see in my mind's eye. I convey it to other people so that they can see it for themselves and they create it. And then we all sit down together and then we talk about how we're going to build it. And it's like, even if you're building a house, you're doing anything, you're first strategizing, you're first envisioning that thing.
Yeah.
And then you're trying to figure out how to create that.
Yeah.
And you have faith that it can get built.
Yeah. It's in that way. It's right. It's confidence. It's like, if I set out on this path, I'm confident that this is going to be the end goal. Yeah.
I mean, even pistis, right? Like, that concept is a concept of like, it's like a divine belief. Like, I believe in a creator that created us.
Yeah.
Like, I believe in that. And I believe that the universe around me and that creator created the world, created all these things for the purposes of sustainability for all of us. That like actually things lean in the direction of good for us. We choose something different. And so in a lot of faith traditions, they want to blame the devil. Blame yourself. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And it's like, I want to be careful about that because there are also structures and systems that exist that like exist here to oppress people.
Yeah. And
like, it's about time we just, we acknowledge that that's happening and we don't use it as an excuse for us not to be free.
Yeah. I mean, we're finding at some point the realization that we participate in them and there is a way to be free from it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All my black and brown brothers and sisters, I hope that y'all can hear, sisters and siblings. Like, I hope that you can hear brothers, sisters, and siblings. I want to be really clear. I'm acknowledging all the people out there.
Nice. Yeah.
I want to be clear that that this isn't a conversation around whether or not reparations should happen, which is a conversation that we definitely, want to talk about.
We'll be having, yeah.
And, I'm going to be that's part of my work is going to be all about reparations,
yes.
Particularly African reparations.
Yeah.
Our black folks coming from the African diaspora.
Yeah.
I believe in all of that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, when George Floyd got murdered, right, I made this video, and I'm like, I'm crying, I'm having all this emotion and things like that. But one of the things that was really profound when I started listening back to it, and the sentiments, the feelings that I was having was like, ain't nobody coming to help us. We're like waiting for somebody to change. We're waiting for America to miraculously change their abusive practices. Like, we're dating an abuser.
Yeah.
you know? Yep. And like, we've been dating this abuser for forever, and we keep coming back, expecting them to stop abusing us.
Right.
And I'm saying them, like, I'm saying them as a generalization.
It's a systemic them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And so for me, it's like, I'm just leaving the empire. I don't want to date you no more. I don't want to be in a relationship with you no more. I'm tired of that. And I get to choose that.
Yeah.
But then I got to then decide, what does it mean for me to choose that? How do I choose that in a powerful way?
Yeah.
So I'm not walking around like homeless and I can't get it together and I can't,
Yes.
you know, I become a victim again.
Yeah, because home is crucial.
Exactly.
And that's what you were ripped from, is home.
Yeah.
You're finding it in many ways. And I think, you know, you and I once gave a tag team sermon on faith.
Yeah.
And we talked about allegiance. Like, it does come down to, what are you putting your trust in to bring about your wholeness or your peace or your freedom? And you're saying, I'm no longer putting my trust in this thing that gave birth to my enslavement and my oppression. Yeah, of course, there's no more faith in that.
Yeah.
You know, and so, I mean, that's one of the things you and I have talked about, is to use this space. In a lot of ways, we're going to be talking about reparations going forward. This isn't the last time you're going to be on here. We're going to be talking about that and your work and what that's going to look like. And I, for one, am curious. You know, I'm a person of faith, in the sense that I have this trust that if I walk this path, another world is possible, one other than the one that we've experienced. And so my curiosity keeps me longing for that.
Yeah.
And when you talked about reparations and inviting me into what, you know, that could look like in this space, I'm curious. And that's the thing that keeps me going. When you lose your curiosity, it's like, well, I know this thing's going to solve it for me. I know America's got my back. And they don't have your back.
Nope. Nope. Made it perfectly clear. I don't know how. I mean, we've been waiting for like 400 years. I don't know how much longer we need to wait to understand. Like, and if we saw an abusive relationship happening like this, if we saw like a young lady or a young man or you know, a young individual that's in an abusive relationship with somebody, we would tell them to leave.
Get out.
We would tell them to get out before they die.
Right.
In our case, we keep saying, just give us another chance.
Yeah.
Just give them another chance. Just give them another chance. That's like what we're doing. We're continuing to participate in trying to, you know, they just need more time to change. It's like, no, y'all, that ain't gonna happen.
No, and what it comes down to really is that an institution of any kind, forget an empire, is rarely, if ever, we haven't experienced it, going to be able to do justice to its people.
Yeah.
It's there to serve the needs of power and expansion.
Yeah.
That's what an empire does. So whoever benefits that nation's ability to get power and expansion, that's who does well.
Right.
So what we're talking about, this is where Yeshua is a powerful example of, don't invite the rich people. We're bringing about welcome and hospitality for people that don't serve the greater need for power, money, greed, control, all that stuff. Now we're about a different thing. And, that thing that you talk about is aligned somehow with Christianity. I don't know how. They've co-opted that Jesus, that Yeshua, but it's not true. And that's what we're longing for, is this truth thing. That, to be honest, before having many of these conversations in recent days, I've abandoned that word.
Yeah.
You know, I'm like, yeah, it's true for you. It's true for me, whatever. It's interesting to hear that definition of it. Truth, hope, and faith, these words that we just throw around like we don't think about them. And yeah, they have profound consequences for the way we use them.